Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Stanley. This is their part number F179 4x3.5 US1D. And there it is. This is a hinge that's not unusual, although it's not by any stretch the most common of hinge because of its rectangular shape. And it's in a US1D finish, which is a very interesting finish. So first, let's just start at the beginning. It's an F179. That means a number of things in no particular order. It's made of steel. This would be a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaf here and here, that when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. Okay, so that's what we call a full mortise hinge versus a half mortise or half surface or full surface or swing clear or anchor hinge or raised barrel or wide throw. Lots of different hinge types. This happens to be a full mortise hinge. You wouldn't surface mount this because that swag on the hinge leaf, because it's bent, the barrel would not allow it to lay flat, whereas a full surface does not have that swag or that bend on the leaf that you see here and here. This is a 5-knuckle hinge. See why it's called a 5-knuckle hinge. It's also a plain bearing hinge. There are no bearing packets at all, just plain bearing. You would use a plain bearing hinge in a low, light, moderate, type usage. If you want ball bearing, you would want to order an FBB 179. I would encourage ball bearing in all instances, basically, unless, of course, economy was the driving factor on the purchase decision. Ball bearing hinges do cost more, not noticeably more. But what you will notice, the difference between ball bearing and plain bearing, depending on the usage, and even if it's very low use, eventually you'll see a quite noticeable wear pattern on a plain bearing hinge. So if you're going to do a home and you're going to do some of these hinges, if you have doors that are rarely opened, plain bearing's probably just okay. On those common doors, maybe a basement door, maybe a door from the attached garage into the house, the main entry doors, ball bearing, absolutely. That will be money well spent. Now, this is 4 by 3.5. The height is the first dimension. It's crucial that we understand the height is the first dimension when we give the size by 3.5. Why is that crucial? Well, if I tell you it's a 4 by 3.5, and you're thinking the width is the first dimension, like you would if it was a door, 3 foot by 6 foot 8, you would prep a hinge too small. Or if I said it was a, let's see here, if I said that it was a 4.5 by 6, and you were thinking that it was 4.5, okay, you would have, again, a hinge that would be prepped, too small. Let's say if I gave you a hinge that was 6 by 5, and you were thinking the height was the second dimension, you'd have the same sort of problem. Or 4 by 6, you might have a hinge prepped too large. So height is the first dimension. It's important to know that for prepping reasons. This is a standard weight hinge from Stanley. So in a 4-inch, I think this should be about 130 thousandths. My caliper tells me 0.134. 0.134. A little thick than what it ought to be, but that's certainly well within tolerance. Now, this is US1D. Right now, it's the year 2020. Black has become a pretty popular color. Lots of people buying lots of different items in black. Hinges, lock sets, trim and auxiliary hardware. Whether it be different versions of black, whether it's plated or japanned or it's powder coated, black has enjoyed a resurgence in popularity in the last couple of years. But black has been around forever. Black has been, I can direct you to a catalog that's almost 100 years old where it says US1D right in the catalog. Okay, so black has been around, since the beginning of finishes. It's a classic, timeless finish. We are experiencing at this time a resurgence of a renaissance even of finishes available to the end user where, 20 years ago, black wasn't going to be available on a hinge. It just wasn't. But now it is. 80 years ago, 90 years ago, it was common, typical. It was probably what people said, just give me the black hinges. It's probably what they said. didn't think about it. It wasn't in vogue. It was the thing. What's the difference between, you know, your hand-polished bronze and black? Oh, it's a big upcharge. Just give me the black ones. That's probably what it was. Today, it's vogue or it's chic to have black hinges. Now, what is US1D? I'm by no means a plating expert or a finishing expert, but I can tell you that US1D... Let's back up. I just said US, the United States. The US, the United States, formed a committee, a commission of industry people, industry companies, that all agreed to come up with a standardized numbering convention for uniform finishes. So if I ordered US1D from this company and US1D from that company, it would match, or at least be intended to match. The point of that is I want to buy my locks from this person, my hinges from this person, I want them all in US1D. That was in the late 1920s, early 1930s. I think I have a Corbin catalog from 1932 that has the US system in it, but a catalog from the late 1920s does not. So I know that it came in right at about that time. Before the US system was put into place, it was every manufacturer calling it whatever they wanted to call it. And the idea of that was very much, and I love Baldwin. They're my favorite residential. They're not residential locks. They are locks that are used in every application, but you think of them in residences. Baldwin is an incredibly high-quality manufacturer of hardware. Strangely, though, I don't love their hinges, not for the finish. Baldwin has finishes that only Baldwin does. So that's a throwback to 100-plus years ago, where if you fell in love with a color, you needed to buy that finish from that manufacturer. Now, luckily, 100-plus years ago, I don't have an old Stanley catalog in the front of my brain that I can rattle off, but you know, in 1900, from Corbin, you would buy all your door hardware, all your hinges, all your trim and auxiliary, all your window hardware. It would all come from one source. Well, that's not the case anymore, and hasn't been for a long time. You're only going to buy from Stanley their hinge or their lock or their closer or their panic device. You're not going to buy everything else possible. So a standardization was required for these finishes. Well, that's the US system. Well, at some point, I'm going to guesstimate in mid-century, the Builders Hardware Manufacturers Association, maybe in the 70s, I don't know. I've not researched that, I intend to, came up with the BHMA system. It took the US system and made it better, meaning the US system will give you the finish and a description, but doesn't tell you the base material. The BHMA number gives you the finish, but tells you the base material. So now you can be more educated in terms of what it is that I'm getting. So the 3-digit code is a more accurate way. There is not a BHMA code for US1D, however. There is a BHMA code for US1B, and that's 601. That's bright black japanned. Well, according to a 1932 catalog from Corbin, this is US1D. It's dull black japanned. If you were to search the term japanned, you would find that it's a process that's done over the base material itself. It's a combination of different parts, chemicals, that are applied to the hinge and then I believe that they're baked, is what it is. The US1D is the flat or the dull, or according to Corbin in 1932, a dead black japanned, dead black, because it's meant to infer that it's flat. And while it does reflect the light, my overhead light, it's not bright black japanned, which is glossy in its finish. So a very classic finish. This client has ordered this one hinge as a test. I'm not sure what they're testing. They may be testing their clearance, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Why you would want a 4x3.5? Why not just 4x4 or 3.5, 3.5? But black, it's the fancy color that is fancy again, or maybe fancy for the first time. You know, black is, you know, black says to itself, boy, 100 years ago, they only wanted me when they couldn't afford anything else. Now, all of a sudden, I'm the fancy guy on the block. That could be what black says to itself. Anyway, let's switch to the screen view and take a closer look at some supporting documentation. Okay, so here's the hinge we are looking at. An F179 4x3.5 US1D, full mortise, standard weight, plain bearing, steel base, black coated hinge. We've covered all of those components in the first part of this video, extended description information down here for use on internal or external doors without door closers in hospitals, churches, schools, airports, etc., etc. I would use a plain bearing hinge in only the lightest of applications. However, if you have a door closer, it's required that you have ball bearing hinges. Gives us the size and the other requirements. It has a removable pin. I could drive the pin out of this if I need to, which I likely will when I'm hanging the door. Square corner, black coated. Gauge, standard weight. Okay, we've talked about this stuff. Tech drawing, let's see what that's all about. Okay, so here is a dimensional drawing of our hinge. F179, steel-based hinge, gives us our F dimension, which is our edge of the leaf to the swag line, which is 1 5/16. And this strikes at why you might want a small hinge like that. If you're not sure if the locations for the screws are going to line up, well, here's the drawing that will tell you where this hinge is going to be prepped. This would be considered the template pattern, meaning any manufacturer who makes a hinge and or a door and or a frame to the template pattern, this hinge is going to bolt up into it or screw down onto it. Okay, so no reason to worry about that. However, in the world of 4-inch hinges, there are lots of different hole patterns, so definitely check if you're not positive that this will match. Okay, the same template is good for 4, 5, 6, and 7-inch wide hinges because the only thing that changes is that leaf length here. All right, the next document, cut sheet. Okay, that's nice. That comes right out of the Stanley catalog for our F179. Shows us all of the different sizes we can do. We can go up to a 5x5 in an F179. Also talks about the stainless steel base material. F179 becomes F191 when it's a brass or bronze or stainless base item. The finish will then dictate what we're doing in terms of the base material. If you ordered 611, which is polished bronze, it would be an F191 611 or an F191 32D bronze base material or stainless steel base material. Handy because it tells you the size of the hinge, it's what it's made in, and then also the thickness of the leaf. Other important data is here. This will be review for us, so we won't touch on it again. Installation template. Yeah, this is a document that's from National, a company that either Stanley owns or a sister company. And then the hinge size. Okay, again, another Stanley National document that doesn't really apply to what we're working on. Now, what does apply to what we're working on is the following. Link here below this video to the manufacturer's page. That's going to allow you to review not only all of the Stanley products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to their hardware catalog, their hinge catalog. There is a more current document that exists. I happen to be partial to this 2010 version of their catalog because I'm familiar with it, number one. Number two, I find it easy to be able to sort out where all of the parts are. And I just wanted to pull up this Corbin finish chart. That's here. US1D. This is from 1932. Dead Black Japan. And it's a cross-reference on this page and this page and goes across and tells us the other manufacturers and what they would call it. So US1D is in this first column. Let's go to the next page and see if Stanley's here. Right here. The Stanley Works. So they called it J1 is what they is in 1932 or thereabouts. Stanley called this US1D. They called it J1. So that would be a finish that is obviously not proprietary to them because this Vonnegut hardware called it that as well. I don't know who or what Vonnegut hardware was or did. Russell and Irwin, they're alive and well. That's Corbin Russwin. Sargent, Yale. Anderson Foundry, I don't know. Best is still around. Bomber is certainly still around. Champion, Chantrell, Chicago, Cleveland, Clinton. France, Griffin, gone. Hager, alive and well. Lawrence Brothers is gone. They were in a town, I believe they were in, not Princeton, Illinois. Maybe they were in Princeton or in that general area, 90 minutes to the west of Chicago. They're gone. There's Lawrence Brothers, the name still exists, but it is not the company that it used to be. Lockwood is gone, although Lockwood is a name known in Australian high-security cylinders. McKinney, very much alive and well. Milwaukee Stamping, gone. National still exists. Norwalk, Payson, Peck, Penn, Reading, gone. Oscar C. Rickson, alive and well, the Rickson Company. Siegel, gone. Schlage, still alive and well, almost hitting 100 years old, will next year. Siegel, gone, although that brand name is still alive and well. If you know the name Siegel, you do for their rim-mounted deadbolts. Primeline is the name of the company that owns the Siegel trademark. J.B. Schroeder, never heard of him. Sharon, Shelby, Skillman, gone. Vonnegut, never heard of him. Stanley, still alive and well. Many of these companies are sister companies to each other. Some of them are. But the big names, Corbin, Russwin, Sargent, Yale, Best, Schlage, and obviously Stanley is what we're talking about here. I don't have an old Stanley catalog, is why I'm referring to this old Corbin catalog. Now, that catalog we just talked about. In the beginning of the document, they give you a general hinge information section. If you deal with hinges at all, if you are in the commercial hardware industry and you're relatively new, you'll certainly want to treat the first so many pages of the Stanley catalog as required reading. It just is. The part that will apply to us is going to be the formula by which you determine the width of the hinge that you require. Formula to determine hinge width where additional clearance is required, or where you can eliminate the requirement of a wider hinge because no additional clearance is required. This is the formula right here. Okay, this tells you everything. This client ordered a 4-inch tall hinge that's only 3.5 wide. You might say to yourself, that's unusual. And it is, it's atypical. But it could be the really smart hinge to use, and here's why. You don't want the vertical axis of pivoting any further away from the center of the door than is necessary. Keep this tucked as close to this area as you can. This formula tells us how to do that. So take the door thickness and deduct the back set. So let's just say 1 3/4 minus 1/4 inch is 1.5 inches times 2. That's 3 inch. Add any clearance that you need. Add any inset that you have. The clearance is obviously, what do I have to get out and around? The dimension from the face of that, whatever it will be, brick mold, drywall, stone, masonry, some sort of corrugated metal. And then you add to that also your inset. Is the door flush with the exterior of the frame, or is it moved in a little bit? It's likely going to be inset a very slight amount, possibly well less than 1/8 of an inch. You could also have an inset that's 5 inches. The point is the formula tells you to calculate it. So 1 3/4 minus backset times 2 is 3 inch, and then you add any clearance and any inset. So what that means is this client came up with no more than 1/2 of an inch in his clearance and inset. The clearance could have been 0, and the inset could have been less than 1/8 of an inch. You then go to the next biggest hinge. That's where the client gets to 3.5 inch. So here's an example of what I would mean by that. Here are two different wall conditions. I will just draw them the same way. These wall thicknesses are quite very much different. This is going to be 8-inch block, which is 7 5/8. This is going to be 4 7/8. 3 5/8 metal studs with 5/8 rock on either side. Okay. So, in one instance, I have a hinge, and I know that I have to go to 180 degrees. I know I have a hinge that's got to get my door from here to over here. The question becomes is, what's that clearance? Now, over in this application, you don't have, your clearance is 0. So the client clearly has a situation where he's tucking his vertical axis of pivoting under the center of the door smartly, because his clearance is 0 or very small. Over here, you got to think about what's your clearance. Well, let's say this isn't, let's change it. This is no longer 8-inch block. It's 16-inch, because you have 120-year-old, you know, West Side Chicago construction, and that door's got to go to 180 degrees. You really need to think about what is that hinge dimension needing to be in terms of width. And the way you calculate that is using the formula we just went over. So a client who will order a 4x3.5 or a 4.5x4 or a 5x4 tells me, or a 5x8 tells me they've done their homework and done their math to determine the right size. The uninitiated would just order a 4.5, and that's fine, except that it's not best practice, and it possibly could have been done better. So be mindful, run the formula, get the right hinge, or the best hinge. It may not matter year 1, but 2 decades later, 9 decades later, the health of that door frame and that hinge are going to be reliant on those initial decisions. Ball bearing, plain bearing, and what width of hinge to use. And, you know, and the height as well. So this client ordered a 4-inch tall hinge. That tells me that the door is likely 1 3/4 thick. Very likely tells me it's not 1 3/8. So very interesting how the client went about ordering that hinge. This 4.5x3. Pardon me. This 3x4. This 4x3.5. Okay. And you do need to know the height is the first dimension, because rectangular hinges are common. 5x4.5. Okay, 6x5, 4.5x4, and then the other way, 4.5x6, 5x8. These are all sizes that you will bump into. There is, back to that link to the manufacturer's page, you'll be able to review not only all of the Stanley products we sell, but a link to their website as well. Let's wrap up this video on camera. Now with Stanley, you don't just get a hinge, even though you basically just get a hinge. You're going to get screws, obviously. Everybody will give you those. This has obviously come with all wood screws and all machine screws. By all means, absolutely indicate in the comment field at the time of order what screws you want. There's no reason to leave it to the manufacturer to pack their standard configuration. I don't know if all wood and all machine screws are standard for this. As far as I'm concerned, it wouldn't be. I would be thinking that we're dealing with a, you know, very possibly wood is what comes to mind. Now you can certainly find hollow metal frames with 4-inch tall hinges, or 3.5-inch tall hinges for that matter. The entire Lake Michigan shore of Chicago, from, you know, the Gold Coast all the way up, has 10, 20, 30, 40 plus story condo buildings, apartment buildings, etc. Steel frames in a lot of those, with 1 3/8 doors with 3.5-inch hinges. So you don't know for sure, but if I was going to guess, I'm thinking wood door, wood frame. But don't leave it to chance. You don't want to get your case of black hinges and get to work on a Saturday to find out you've got half the screws you need, because you're not going to walk into the, you know, the home improvement stores of the world and find black hinge screws for, you know, machine screw, flat undercut head machine screws in black for a steel frame. What not everyone gives you are shims. This is perforated cardboard, very easy, simple, and straightforward. It's nice that Stanley provides those. They have a dual roll though. They keep the hinges isolated from each other when they pack them in the box. This client literally ordered one to test, so that's why there's one hinge on this order. They will pack these 3 in a box. They're not sold per box. They're sold per hinge. If you needed 4, if you're doing a Dutch door, they won't make you buy 6. You can buy just 4. Or if you want to test one out, you can buy just 1. So that's why we price them per hinge. If you have any questions on the Stanley F179 4x3.5 US1D full mortise hinge or any other Stanley product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you. If you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please click subscribe as well, and even share the video with someone that you know. And if you have any questions for a future video, please send them our way and we will make every attempt to oblige. And thank you very much.